Hi, I'm Amber Buehler, and I have a show this month at M Galleries in Washington, New Jersey. It's called Temporal Distortions. Temporal Distortions has to do with the temporariness of time, and the distortion part is more about just our perceptions. So I was the youngest child of 3. I grew up around a lot of adults, and sadly, because my father was so much older, I think I was always aware of time, that our time together was always fleeting. He was an artist, as was his brother, and is my sister and her daughter. So I guess art just kind of is something that's always been a big part of our family in one way or another. I had wanted to go to art school, but that didn't happen. I wanted to actually be a photojournalist, but that's okay. I took a different path, and I ended up working with my family's business, and I did that until my father died. So I moved after that into a corporate job. It paid the bills, but it was pretty much soul crushing, just like everyone says. Right. I mean, that's not really anything new. Right. So
I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, well, I feel like the photojournalism certainly plays a role in the way you think about images and way you think about art. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I usually write stories, even if I don't share them. I usually write pieces that accompany the visual images. Sometimes they just help me form the final piece, and other times they are the reason for making the piece the way that it is. But I always liked the idea of photojournalism because I think I do have a lot to say, and I want my feelings to also be conveyed in those images as well. I don't want someone to like write for me. So for me, it's really important to have like a strong side, strong on both sides, I guess I should say, about just our perceptions. So I looked up, because I was curious myself, just like about the origin of the word temporal, and it comes from the Latin word temporalis, which literally means of time, and it usually is applied to words that are just temporary in nature, like a temp job and so forth.
Sure.
That's like the very simple way of explaining it. But the perception part of it, I think, is interesting because I couldn't help but think about how time affects our perception, but then also perception affects the way we view time. Time can seem to pass really quickly, but it can also be so painfully slow, and time can make us better or worse. So this show kind of explores that. I wanted to show the movement of time in just all of its various aspects, which I probably didn't even scratch the surface because time is infinite.
Right.
So,
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So this one's called Portal, and this one I find interesting because it's just a photo of 2 ordinary women, and they're like completely frozen in time. They obviously were posing for the photo, even though it's like an informal setting, but in the original image, the younger woman in the front, her hair was blowing in the breeze, and you can't really tell. So I decided to play on that, to kind of pull the viewer into their world, even though there's not much necessarily going on at first glance, but I don't know where they are, I don't know who they are, and I just really liked how it was still, but it seemed to move to me.
Yeah, right.
So I even put like, you probably can't tell, especially on video, but like her legs are like repeated here in a swirling motion.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, like right there.
I just noticed that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Like the pictures and the video, you'll have no idea what this image fully looks like. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, in person it's so, especially like all 3 of them really.
So I have a question about your pieces that utilize human subjects. So you don't know these people, they're not relatives, or like where do you get your source material for something like that?
So these were in a batch of family photos from my grandma.
Okay.
This woman looks like someone in the family, but I don't know who it is.
But you don't know?
No.
Okay.
And there was nothing on the back. And I don't know who this woman is, so maybe she was a neighbor. I don't really know.
Okay.
But throughout the show, there are family members in the pieces, but not all of them. During the pandemic, I did this collage challenge through and with the Paris Collage Collective. and we were given a theme. And I was so happy, and they were so happy, which I was thrilled about, but they were so happy with the result of what I did that I included them in the show.
Oh, that's
so
great.
3 of them are not mine originally at all. It's like,
Oh.
is that my mom? And I'm like, no. I'm like, it's really old. But anyway, I was thinking about, I don't know if you can see, but like she's standing here in the forefront, but then in the background, she's in a doorway again, in black and white.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking about sort of just how we view like possibilities and opportunities.
Yes.
So it's kind of, it could be perceived as negative, but I was thinking about how like one open door could seem like this great thing, but is it? Like what's beyond that door? And like,
it's an opportunity, but for what?
For what? And then even if there's a million doors, like, is this futile? And I kind of was thinking about futility a lot when I made this piece. Like, that's why the subtitle of this piece is Open Doors or Closed Doors.
Oh, see, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I just couldn't stop thinking about that.
I thought it was very ethereal.
So these possibilities could simultaneously seem suffocating or freeing, depending on what those things are through that. And that kind of goes, that even speaks to the title of the show. These temporal distortions, it's all about our perception and what we feel and think. We could actually go through the same thing and we would feel completely differently about it.
Yeah.
Because we're different people.
Right.
What have we been through before?
Right.
What are our
the filter
fears?
Is us.
Exactly. So, but I love hearing personal comments like that, so thank you. I thought about is how art education is really lacking. And you can see that in how most people are intimidated by art. They don't feel comfortable around it. They feel like it's like the secret club they can't be a part of. You know, like we invited someone to a museum one time and they were just like, what are we gonna do there?
Right.
And we're like, look at art. And they're like, well, we don't really get art. I'm like, there's a lot of different kinds. Why don't you come with us? Like, just, you know, so I think that kind of speaks to that whole idea that it seems inaccessible.
Right,
and I don't know if it's because museums aren't free and they should be. I mean, they are in DC and other parts.
That's right.
You know, in other states. But for the most part, I think that a lot of people, I think there's probably a lot of talented people who they don't even realize that they could be artists as well.
Yeah.
So I think it just affects. It's just like a trickle down effect.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be nice if more people had more exposure, or even just someone told them that it was okay to just walk around a museum and look around. You don't have to like study it. You can just enjoy it and get something out of it for an afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
I had a photography teacher in high school who was so encouraging to me. He was the one who got me to experiment with textures and layers. I mean, we developed our own film. I burned my own images. I would make tracings like on tracing paper and like with like pencil, and I would burn that right on. So I was doing the layering like right there.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and he was always like, just get weird with it, like do whatever. And I had such a blast in that class. And he was like such a, just to look at him, like you wouldn't think that he would be an experimental person, but he was really interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad I had a person like that instead of someone who just was like going through the motions. He really cared about it.
Yeah.
So I think even though I already had a love of photography and composition, he really nurtured that love of texture and just experimentation and feeling like there's no limitation. Like just try it and see if it works.
So he gave you permission to be experimental.
He did.
Yeah.
When I went to Baltimore a few weeks ago, the art museum was free. And then even though they normally have all of their special exhibitions, like they're normally ticketed and charged, like 1 or 2 days of the month they do this thing called Community Day, where it's free to everyone because they want all of the local people to come in.
That's a great idea.
And I thought that was wonderful.
Right.
And then I went to the Barnes and I was this close to a Van Gogh I had never seen because they just let you.
They just let you do it.
They just let you. Oh, they just let you get up on it, and I was able to
I'd be
take.
afraid to breathe on it.
No, they don't
That's
care.
Like my church.
I mean, a lot of Van Gogh's stuff were just stored in like a damp attic forever, and they're fine. But I took photos like at an angle just because I wanted to see the texture of his brush strokes.
Right.
Like I took like
I know.
some
I
straight
just
on.
saw some Van Goghs at the Met, and oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, at the Barnes, literally, you can get like this close. What? And I did that, and I was so moved because anyway, I won't get into that because I could talk about
I
it forever.
cried.
Yeah.
It's okay. There's no shame in it.
Yeah, so I went to the
I
gift
cried
shop.
like a baby.
Nor guilt.
Nor guilt.
No
Nor shame.
guilt, no shame. I cried in front of the Van Goghs. I did.
No, they're
Yeah,
beautiful.
that was
They're
beautiful.
incredible.
But I bought a print, that
Yeah.
print that
Yes.
I saw, because
Of
I was like,
course.
well, I can't have that because it's at the
But
Barnes.
it's a memory.
It's a memory, and I decided that who am I to say I'm only going to have original art? That's
And it's valuable. Those memories are valuable.
very impressionable.
Yes.
And you took me there, and I saw, I don't remember the name of it, but there was one of a dog sleeping on a quilt,
Mhm.
and then Mom, well, at my request, Mom bought me the same quilt because I wanted to like recreate my room to look like that painting.
Oh, wow.
So I just recently bought a print of that because
Yeah.
I realized that going there as a young person was a really big deal for me.
All right. So do you want to go into the pieces behind you here?
Sure. So this one was made during the pandemic. I saw this old, I think it was like an MAB paint store, and it used to say like quality you can see ... paint, but someone painted over the T, which I thought was really bizarre. So then I just like went with that, and at the time I was feeling like experiencing a lot of physical pain myself, and I just played with that idea of how pain can be like a recurrent, you know, I mean, it's just a part of life, whether it's emotional or physical. So, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's just,
Yeah, yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's present, yeah.
Yeah, so some people asked me if I was okay after they saw this, and I was like, I'm fine. That was just more about like how, you know, pain can kind of hit you at any time, and it kind of reverberates. So honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about it in that sense, but I just layered it with like other textures like burlap and some images that I took when Jesse and I went into the woods during the pandemic because there was nowhere else to go.
Right.
So we went out one day and just
Yeah.
took pictures outside, and I just layered it with that because I didn't have a lot of source material at the time
Oh,
because
okay.
no one was going anywhere.
Right.
So
Yeah, that
That's-
presents creative challenges. doesn't
yeah,
it?
it did. I didn't want to get into a slump, so that's kind of how I went around it.
It's kind of nice though. It makes you, it forces you to be creative and to kind
Yeah,
of think outside the box and make your own tools, so to speak,
I
to
agree.
do things differently.
I agree. It did make me feel that way. It's like when you have a plant that, you know, you don't water for a while and it actually makes the roots stronger
Yeah.
because it has to like water, and I felt like that
Yeah.
because there was not a lot going on. We all know because we all went through it.
Yep.
There wasn't a lot going on. So this piece is a result of that time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
And you're the piece on the right here?
we've gotten a lot of comments about this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
I
people
love it.
really, yeah,
I
that
love
makes
it.
me happy. So this original image was one of the Paris Collage Collective images. It was actually like a hotel or something, but I decided to portray it more like as a person revisiting like a time or like a place in their life, like maybe like a vacation, they like a vacation spot they went to as a child,
Mm-hmm.
and like trying to relive those memories,
Mm.
and you go
That's
like
nice.
again and again
And again.
and again.
Yeah.
And it's great, and you like love it, and then like maybe you go as an adult and you're like, oh, like this is okay. And you're like, did the
It's
ice cream
smaller than
like
I remember.
yeah, like I thought the ice cream tasted amazing because we always got this ice cream, and then you have it and you're like, this is gross, and you're like, it made me think about just experiencing moments as they are and not trying to recreate them,
Mm-hmm.
because
I like that. That's a powerful message.
you know, like you can try to like recreate everything like to a T, and it's just you can't manufacture emotions.
The
like that.
original experience.
No,
you just
you
can't.
can't.
Curious about your Can See Pain piece
Mhm.
and what the choice of colors meant to you, and specifically what the white kind of like it almost feels like negative space means, or if it means anything, or just what the choice was.
No, it actually was intentional. It's interesting that you picked up on that. But sometimes, like when I would get migraines, the pain was so intense that I would have like these ocular type experiences. And it was like almost blinding and uncomfortable. And like I couldn't get away from them. So this area is kind of like that, where it's just like bright, and even if you close your eyes, it's still there. The other color choices weren't really as significant, although I always do tend to lean towards like those warm like pinks and blues and stuff, which I'll probably talk about later. But the white and that kind of like
That's like I call that the neurological whiteout migraines
Yeah.
for years, and that is what it's like.
Yeah,
It's this flash
it
that
is.
kind of obliterates your entire field of vision.
It does. It's like all encompassing.
Yep.
And even sometimes I would even have like, if I would try to read, the
Yeah, you
words
can't.
would like kind of blur together. So that's even why the words reverberate as well, because I couldn't read like a normal sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Photographer, a friend of ours, when I say ours, me and my husband Jesse, his name is John Schenk. I hope he's watching. I don't know if he is, but he's an...
I'll make sure he watches.
Yeah, you should tell him.
Don't you worry.
But he's a
I'll find
photographer.
John Schenk.
You should find John Schenk. He's a really interesting person. I met him when I was 14. It was kind of life-changing. But anyway, he's a photographer, and he's... when I first saw his work, and I still think he makes art this way, he will take a photo, and without kind of like advancing the film, because he still uses film, without advancing the frame, he'll take another photo.
Double exposure.
He
Oh,
does double
nice.
exposures, but like on the actual film.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
It is, and he like does the composition just from memory,
Yeah.
and he's
Wow.
shown his work a lot, at least in the past he did, and I was so moved by that, just by like the just the naturalness of it and just the quality in his eye. I mean, you would just have like something like maybe a person moving, and then there would be like something in nature like lichen or bark, and he just did it so well. So I think for me, like again, always like with my high school experience with that teacher, and then with John, like to me that was normal. Like if you're
Right.
gonna make art, you layer it and there's texture, and
Yeah.
and that's what you do. So he's another huge influence. I should tell him. I'll text him later.
Now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I should tell him that he was a huge influence on me. Yeah.
So, well, do you have any non-art? Any non-artists influence you?
Yeah, I thought of the poet Pablo Neruda, and I actually copied one of his poems. It's short, so I'll read it.
Yeah, fantastic.
But I read this as a young person,
Yeah.
and the imagery was so powerful that I think it's always subconsciously something that I think about, just the way he describes it. It's, tell me, is the rose naked, or is that her only dress? Why do trees conceal the splendor of their roots? Who hears the regrets of the thieving automobile? Is there anything in the world sadder than a train standing in the rain? So he assigns like emotion to inanimate objects, and he just kind of, again, reading this as a young person, it just like my mind just went pow. And I just appreciated how he expressed himself, and so it also just taught me that you can express yourself in any way. Like if it makes sense to me, it's going to make sense to someone else, hopefully. So
Yeah.
so if I make art in a certain way, like if I like it, there's bound to be someone else who will see something that they like in it. So
Thank you. So, do you want to talk about the pieces behind you?
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's really good.
Thank you. This was another piece that I did for Paris Collage Collective. And I don't know why, but it reminds me of just like one of my uncles, or like all of them kind of together. I don't know why. Do you kind of know what I mean or not?
Not yet. Keep going.
No, I'm not
Is
even
that the
sure I'm
title?
ever gonna get there.
Okay.
But when I saw this original image, it was like a lift on like lines, and like work was being done, and just like I know like a lot of, well, two of them I think were in the service, and one went to the Panama Canal and took pictures, and I looked at his pictures, and even though that's not what that is, it just reminded me of like they had like, I'm not really very close to them, but I mean the one I'm kind of a little bit close to, but like they just did all this stuff before I was even around,
Right.
and they never talk about it, but just like something about that scene reminded me of them, just in general, or like as a combination. Because the original image, of course it was black and white, I made it in color, but I think it just reminded me of like seeing photos that they took overseas while they were in the service, and like I didn't know what I was looking at, and they didn't write on the back, and then
Right.
my grandma got them and was like, oh, I got a, photo and a letter from Bob. And she was just happy that like Bob was alive or something. You know what I mean?
Hey!
Yay, Bob's still alive. You know, he's still alive. He's like 90 something. But anyway, it just kind of reminded me of the photos that I saw from that time period, and it just made me think of them. And I guess the doorways are just again like more like that it's far away, but it's still there.
So is there any reason that people respond to it, which has been remarked several times, that they think it's a ship or a shipwreck or something? Was that just fortuitous that it kind of looks like that, or did you deliberately play with that and try to trick people?
No, I didn't. It was unintentional for it to look like a ship. It was more about like our memories of those childhood experiences, that they're hazy. And that we're still trying to like attain that feeling. So no, it wasn't supposed to be a ship. If someone sees a ship, that's fine. But no, it wasn't intentional.
All right. So do you want to go into a little bit about the what of your influences? Like what non-people are your influences?
I'm just drawn to shadows a lot, shapes, textures, as you know. I think I've talked about that at length, and even sound. I want people to hear sound when they look at my stuff. I think I mentioned this a while back, but I'm still really enthralled by 90s shoegaze album covers. And if you look at them, they have this like sort of hazy, washed out movement to them. And I think because that was, I was young at the time in the 90s and listening to them, I think it was just very influential on me. So again, to me, like that's just what art is. So I want people to almost hear like a Cocteau Twins song when they look at something. I mean, if they did, I'd be super honored. I'm not saying that they do. At least that's what I hear. I did make a soundtrack specifically for this show, which anyone can have if they'd like. It's on my Spotify. And it's called Temporal Distortions, and I can share that with whomever would like it.
I'll put the link up.
Yeah, but I put things on there that I was listening to heavily at the time, or things that just really reminded me of the pieces themselves, or at least like, even if you know you get something different out of it, like maybe just while you listen to the soundtrack and like watch like and look at some of the pieces, you might get a sense of how I feel when I look at them. Kind of look at it through my eyes.
All right. So I think particularly with these pieces, I'd like you to discuss color choices.
Sure.
So can you go into your color choice process?
Sure. Used a photo that I had taken of my hydrangea bush in my yard. And for some reason, hydrangeas always remind me of the past. Like, I don't know why, they just do. They just seem like, I mean, all flowers have just always been around, but there's something about hydrangeas that seem old to me. So I wanted to put them as the background to this piece. And then of course I have the vines and like the dried up bits on top to kind of contrast the idea of like, you know, we have a young woman, you know, like a very young woman, and then she's next to an older woman. This piece kind of made me sad in a way. It's my husband's family. This was like his great aunt Elva, I think. I don't even know if he ever met her. She might have died before he was born. I don't remember. But I titled the piece Autumn. But yeah, I definitely did want to contrast like a flower, the hydrangea in its at its peak, and then you have like this concrete. There's concrete, like with like vines growing over it that are dying.
Right.
And they're getting shriveled, and I don't know.
I think it's great.
Is there anything to the fact that those vines also are like crossing their bodies? It almost looks to me like they're bound.
Like trapped in autumn.
Yes, that is intentional. That is intentional. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, like I said, I didn't mean for it to be like too dark, but that is what I thought of when I made the piece. So, and like the only thing I even know about Aunt Elva is that I don't know if she ever had children or anything. They just said that when they would go visit her as an old woman, she would offer them tea, and they would ask for like sugar, and she would hand them the sugar bowl, and there was never any sugar in it, and that was like the joke every single time. And that made me laugh. And then I was like, even if her sugar bowl was in its like almost autumn or winter. Like the original image was of a building I had taken a photo of in Austin, Texas. and it was a really pretty building. And then when I got home, I started looking through old family photos again, and I took a picture of my great grandma, who I never met, and I had put her in one of the windows, like looking out.
Nice.
But I didn't like that it was just her in there, because it was like a newer building, and she died in the 60s, and so I warped it.
Okay.
She died like, before I was born, so I never met her, and apparently everyone like loved her and said she was really great, and I don't really know anything about her, so I just kind of warped the whole image, and I used fabric as another way to like add layers to it. So I warped the building, but then I added, you can see like the folds of the fabric. Sure. So I did mention that I'm drawn to pinks and blues a lot. You'll see that in this body of work and in a lot of my other pieces from other time periods. It really just is because I think they work well together. They calm me. I just think that they're nice. They just work well together. I really don't know how else to say it. But orange seems to show up a lot. I don't know why. And I never studied color theory, but I've always been obsessed with color. And I do remember playing with my dad's Pantone color wheel as a kid. He was an artist, and even when they painted like a room in the house, I always wanted to be like very involved.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember as a kid, one of my classrooms in my elementary school was painted yellow, and I would freak out in there. And I told my teacher, and she was like, "There's nothing I can do about that." And I was really upset by this yellow, because it was just like, it was awful.
Wow.
And I couldn't focus on anything other than the color. It did make me angry. Like, I felt like rage from this yellow.
Fascinating.
Because
So-
it's that horrible institutional.
Yeah, and like the dumb cinder blocks, and just,
Yeah.
I
Was
really,
it just like, was it bright yellow? Like,
yeah, like it hurt
Garish.
my eyes, and it
Wow.
was just,
Huh.
it was
It's
just,
not a calming yellow.
and against like the green chalkboard,
Yeah.
like even if the chalkboard had been black, I can see there was nothing about it. I felt so uncomfortable in there, and I couldn't focus. So, so when my parents wanted to paint a room in the house, I always had like a lot to say about it.
Right on.
And so yeah, I would play with my dad's Pantone color wheel, and I would just like spin it around, and I loved all of the variations of color.
Yeah.
And they just, I'm not trying to sound like whatever you want to call it, but like it just, like I couldn't believe there were that many blues and
Yeah.
that many greens, and there were options. It was just like possibility for me. And incidentally, I didn't know my mom still had it, because she throws away like everything. But over the summer when she was moving, she asked me if I wanted
Oh, wow.
the Pantone color wheel. So it's in my studio now, which is like amazing that I have that, because I remember playing with it as a small child. And I thought it was cool that my dad had that, because I was happy that he cared about color, if that makes sense.
Right.
So far, it's photography, some painting, collage, digital and analog. And I hope to at some point soon, hopefully, but I'm not gonna like put a date stamp on that, but I would like to work with some, so.
Do tell.
Jesse and I saw something that was really inspiring to work with some kind of sculpture, or at least some kind of physical objects. And I said, okay, I'm like, well, I'm really bad with tools and stuff and super clumsy. And he's like, I'll help you. So, I hope that that's something we do, because I have ideas that I, like, I have
That's
some really,
always fun.
yeah. And I love that, like, he, thought of it, and I love that he was like, I think you can do something. He's like, I love what you're doing. He's like, it's no small thing, but he's like, I think we could do something even more interesting.
Utilizing an object.
To incorporate my art.
Right on.
So I have some ideas. I don't know what's gonna pan out, but I want to do something else.
That's
exciting.
part of the fun,
It's
though.
exciting,
Yeah,
The experimenting.
exactly. So, and it might be terrible. It might be garbage, and I'll be like, I ended up burning it for firewood. So,
Or it might be great.
yeah,
You
and
don't
that's
know.
fine. That'll
You
serve a
never know.
purpose too. So, keep me warm. So,
That's right.
it won't be a total loss.
Oh, fantastic. So do you want to go into the piece behind you here? One of the pieces?
Yeah, so this is another piece that I did for Paris Collage Collective. They provided an image of two men standing on like a power pole, electrical pole, I don't really know. But it was like one was standing and one was like hanging from it. and I just decided to repeat and put them upside down and kind of like show almost like the movement and the almost like a time lapse type thing, like all the things they would have to do while working on whatever they were working on. So I repeated it and I layered it a couple of times. And my brother-in-law picked out that there's a thumbprint at the bottom. And I did that on purpose because I remember looking at pictures as a kid, and there was always like some adult being like, don't put your thumb on the front of the, don't just touch it by the edges. So that was kind of just like a joke that I put like a big thumbprint in the center. I mean, everyone said that, right?
Yeah.
Am I-
Polaroids because they'd be wet.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd have like some like clumsy person being like, oh, let me see, and there was like a big, So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, I liked kind of repeating the image over and over again, and I layered it with a photo that I taken in South Philly because the image was I think the image, there's not, even though I played with it, there's not much to do with it in the sense that it is what it is. It's depicting people working, and that was pretty cut and dry type of work.
Do you know what
It is
era
a-
that's from?
I don't, although I think when we talked about this, we weren't filming, but this looks pre-OSHA.
Yeah.
Because they're not wearing any protective gear at all, so I don't know, but it's old.
And the suspenders.
And the
kinda give it
suspenders
away,
and the little, it looks like one's wearing a little cap,
Yeah.
so.
And seemingly be
20s to
Yeah.
40s,
Yeah,
maybe.
40s maybe.
Yeah, so I feel like it's like kind of like a very like anything goes, but I feel like it's a strong image because whatever they were doing, it's like what you see is what you get kind of a thing. So I didn't want to play with it too much other than adding the movement. Kind of, it's like I feel like everything I do it kind of has its own like sound. It's almost like my life has a soundtrack, if that makes sense.
I get that.
And music is very important to me. The only time I hated music was after I had a traumatic brain injury, and my brain didn't know how to process music.
Oh, that'd be terrifying.
It was something that I loved so much was actually grating, and it was not enjoyable, and I wasn't discerning it as anything pleasurable. It was horrible. And I remember after a few years, I tried to listen to something, and it sounded good again, and I was so happy. So sound is really important to me. I've even been trying to turn everything off and just listen to the sounds around me.
Just the ambient sounds in the room.
Yeah, because sometimes what we think is like quiet or nothingness, it's not really true. Like I'll hear my cats like grooming each other or playing or trilling, or I'll hear birds, or even like one of my neighbors like yapping about something, and or even my own breathing. And there's a lot there.
There's always something.
There's always something there.
Yeah.
But yeah, sound is just really important to me, and I think I'm grateful for it now, because for a while it was not an enjoyable experience.
All right. So what drives you to do what you do, Amber?
Making art is just a way for me to unwind, to get rid of the clutter in my head, honestly. Sometimes I'll create something and love it. Other times I absolutely hate it. But what I've learned, and this has been intentional, like I've intentionally told myself that even if I don't like the end result, that it wasn't a wasted exercise, because it was still an enjoyment of the process. And even if I didn't learn anything, I mean, maybe I'll learn like, oh, don't put this with that, it looks terrible. I try not to set myself up and like, for disappointment. I just don't put pressure on myself. I just create, and then we see what happens. I just try to approach it like that. So, yeah.
And do you want to discuss this piece behind you here?
Yeah, so,
Very different.
yeah, exactly.
Than a lot of other ones, yeah.
It is. This was also, well, the majority of these pieces were made during the pandemic when, you couldn't go anywhere. It was like before vaccines, and like everyone was just at home kind of going crazy and making sourdough bread and stuff. So I started making found poetry. I just found like old dumb books. They really were dumb, trust me. I wouldn't normally like desecrate a book, but I just was like ripping pages out of books. And so I circled the words that I liked, hallucination, like nostalgia. There's other things in there, but then I like colored it in, and I didn't have a lot of things that inspired me at that time, because again, there wasn't anywhere to go. I mean, that's something we all kind of experienced. Like we were just home. So I took a photo. Jesse had started working from home full time during the pandemic, and he has like a little keyhole in his office door, and he didn't know this, but I took a photo of him. He didn't. That creeped him out when I told him later. But that's Jesse in there. Through the keyhole. Yeah, exactly. He's like, what is that breathing on the other side of the door? He probably thought it was one of the cats or something. But anyway, I didn't
You get a pass. It's okay.
Yeah, I do. I'm not really creepy, but but anyway, I didn't have a lot to work with, so I was trying to create experiences, and so between like doing the found poetry and art, I just layered a photo of that with a photo of him, and I think I used some burlap, a photo of burlap. I think we had like a coffee bag with burlap that had burlap around it. So it is different, but to me it still represents that weird time when like the world just seemed to stop for everybody. Like that was a very weird shared common experience, even if people perceived it differently or whatever. We won't get into that, but at the same time, I mean, things were very odd, and none of us have ever lived through anything like that.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm Amber Buehler, and this has been my show Temporal Distortions, which is at M Galleries through November. So please, if you can get a chance to see it in person, I think you'll get a lot more out of it even than just seeing it over the video. But I appreciate Frank. Thank you for showing my work here
Of course.
and for the interview, and Lane.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful.